For years, the truth stayed hidden. The victims forgotten, the cases left cold, until science revealed what time could not. This is decades in the dark, where cold cases are brought back to light. In the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Shanann Watts stepped off a late flight into Denver. She was 15 weeks pregnant and exhausted from a business trip to Arizona. Friends described her as driven, expressive, deeply devoted to her daughters. She shared birthdays, milestones, and family routines openly online. Bella and Celeste were the center of her world. And she was preparing to welcome a son she had already named Nico. Just before 2 a.m., she texted her husband Chris that she was on her way home to Frederick, Colorado. Shortly before 5 a.m., she walked through the front door. The neighborhood was quiet. The girls were asleep upstairs. Sometime before sunrise, everything changed. At 5:17 a.m., a neighbor's security camera recorded Chris Watts backing his work truck into the driveway, something he rarely did. He later said he was loading tools for work at an oil site. On the footage, he moves back and forth between the garage and the truck bed several times. No visible panic, no urgency, just routine. Hours later, Shannon's friend Nicole Atkinson began to worry. Nicole had dropped Shanann off at home around 2 a.m. She knew Shanann had a scheduled OB appointment that morning. At 15 weeks pregnant, Shanann had been careful about every checkup. When she didn't show and didn't answer her phone, Nicole knew something was wrong. Nicole texted, called, reached out to Chris. His responses felt oddly unconcerned. By midday, Nicole was at the front door. Shannon's car was still in the garage. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her medication was untouched. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed, and yet everything felt off. Police were called for a welfare check. Officers entered the home. The scene was deceptively normal. No forced entry, no overturned furniture. Shannon's phone wedged between couch cushions, blankets upstairs in the girls' rooms. Chris returned home while officers were inside. Body camera footage captured his demeanor. Calm, measured, cooperative, but not frantic, not desperate. He speculated that Shanann might have taken the girls to a friend's house. He offered possibilities before investigators had asked many questions. Then the neighbor mentioned surveillance footage. As they watched the 5:17 a.m. recording next door, subtle cracks appeared. Chris placed his hands on his head. He rocked slightly. His speech quickened. He volunteered explanations about tools and routine before anyone pressed him. The neighbor later told police quietly, "He's not acting right." The following day, Chris stood on his front porch and spoke to television cameras. He asked for his family's safe return. He said, "I just want them back." He referred to his daughters as "those girls" at one point, a subtle linguistic distancing that later drew scrutiny. He swayed, smiled faintly, laughed nervously. The interview lasted less than 5 minutes. Behind the scenes, the investigation was accelerating. Digital evidence began constructing a timeline independent of his words. Chris's work truck was equipped with GPS tracking through Anadarko Petroleum. The system logged his route precisely. He had driven directly from his home to an isolated oil site known as Survey 319. He had not stopped anywhere else. Cell phone records aligned with the truck's movement. Investigators also uncovered text messages between Chris and a coworker with whom he was having an affair. The tone was intimate and forward-looking. Conversations about starting over, about financial freedom, about a future that did not include his current life. Financial strain had also shadowed the marriage. The couple had previously declared bankruptcy. An HOA notice had reportedly arrived in the mail around the time of the murders. Meanwhile, Shanann had confided in friends about tension, but believed the relationship could be repaired. Her parents, Frank and Sandy Rzucek, had recently stayed with the family for 6 weeks that summer. They observed distance, but no violence. 2 days after the disappearance, Chris agreed to take a polygraph examination. The interrogation that followed was controlled and strategic. The examiner established rapport first, casual conversation, baseline questions, steady rhythm, then the direct questions. Did you hurt Shanann? Did you hurt your daughters? The polygraph indicated deception. When confronted, investigators did not shout. They did not accuse aggressively. They allowed silence to stretch, a powerful interrogation tool. Silence forces the subject to fill space. Chris adjusted his narrative. He claimed Shanann had killed the girls during an argument and that he killed her in rage. Investigators pressed for physical detail. Where exactly did it happen? How? What room? False stories often collapse under specificity. Under continued questioning, the story fractured. Chris admitted he had strangled Shanann in their bedroom in the early morning hours. He then drove to Servi 319 with Bella and Celeste alive in the back seat. At the oil site, he smothered his daughters. He placed their bodies inside separate oil tanks. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave nearby. Search teams located the bodies at the GPS-confirmed site. Autopsy findings aligned with the timeline reconstructed from surveillance footage, digital tracking, and communication records. Within weeks, Chris Watts agreed to plead guilty to all charges. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. There would be no trial, no prolonged courtroom battle, just an admission and a sentence. In November 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life terms without parole, plus additional years for unlawful termination of a pregnancy and tampering with deceased human bodies. In the courtroom, Shanann's father addressed him directly. "I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them." There was no rage in his voice, only disbelief. Shannon's mother rejected Chris's earlier attempt to blame her daughter for the girls' deaths. The narrative shift had failed. The evidence had already spoken. The murders of Shanann Watts and her children were not a decades-old cold case, but they stand as a defining example of how modern evidence illuminates darkness almost immediately. At 5:17 that morning, Chris Watts believed he was alone in his driveway. He wasn't. A neighbor's camera recorded his movements. A GPS system mapped his route. Cell towers marked his location. Text messages preserved motive. And in an interrogation room, silence exposed the cracks. Before the confession, before the recovery, before the sentencing, the digital world had already documented the truth. Shanann was 34 years old, Bella was 4, Celeste was 3, and Nico, the son she was carrying, never had the chance to be born. This is Decades in the Dark, where science brings the past to light. Subscribe for more stories where justice never expires.